Hi everybody, my name is Mariella Noto and I'm very happy to be here today. I'm very much looking forward to sharing some more information with you about some challenges that are just too big to be faced alone. Well, that video just gave us a very short view of what ZDHC is doing together with the textile industry. But some of you might have seen another movie that's currently out there, River Blue, that I would recommend very much to everybody who wants to have an idea about what's going on with the environment in relation to the textile industry. It really makes you realize that some challenges are just too big to be faced alone. And it can only be transformed by collaboration, more transparency, and commitments from the industry. Now, I'm not going to go very deep dive into these slides that we're seeing right here, but it all started when Greenpeace in 2011 took samples from wastewater discharge at textile facilities globally, and also tested clothing purchased in brands' flagship stores. Out of these purchased goods, as well as the wastewater discharge, there were some findings that were not very positive. And of course, that was a very big wake-up call for the textile industry at large. So then also ZDHC was born, and our vision is widespread implementation of sustainable chemistry and driving innovations and best practices in the textile, apparel, leather, and footwear industry to protect consumers, workers, and of course, the environment. And so the philosophy of the Roadmap to Zero program is to go away from the part compliance, but more towards proactive supply chain management and innovation leadership, looking towards input chemistry processing and also output chemistry. And of course, we're not doing this alone. We do this with a wide range of stakeholders. We work together with brands and retailers, with the public sector, with suppliers, chemical formulators, and a lot of solution providers as well. And of course, all these groups together can do a lot more research and by taking each other by the hand, also improve the situation on the ground. Now I can imagine that you're thinking, okay, so why should we, manage chemicals? And I think River Blue will explain, if you look at it at some point in time, very much why it should be done. But some other movies that have been made, of course, show the same thing. One of the first reasons is that you need to address concerns from buyers and consumers and also external stakeholders that are out there. Of course, the consumer is getting more and more sensitive of what's in his products that he's buying. Secondly, we'd like to understand the hazards that are associated with chemicals used in the manufacturing process. And lastly, we want to have overall in the world that people take a greater responsibility and an own responsibility for the health and welfare of existing and future generations. Now, there's four different types of definitions that we have for hazardous chemicals. Or there's multiple definitions, of course, for hazardous chemicals, but they are chemicals that show intrinsically hazardous properties. And just to give a few examples, you have carcinogenic or mutagenic and toxic for reproduction chemicals. But you also have chemicals, for instance, that are bioaccumulative. And what would that actually mean? So I can give you a short example. If, for instance, there's pesticides used and they're freshly sprayed, and it starts to rain, as it's currently here in the Netherlands, then those pesticides will be flushed away into the ground or the water that it's near to. And that goes back into a next river or a next basin, which might potentially also end up later on in bigger rivers than the ocean. So it all starts with this place where the pesticides are being used, but it ends kilometers and kilometers further away, and there it also impacts the environment. And that's also some of the things that we see with the textile industry. Of course, it starts at the factory itself and its surroundings, but further down the line, we see that it infects the other areas as well. Now, chemicals, products that may contain priority chemicals that are hazardous are, of course, ending up in different ways from the textile factory into the environment. They can come into the environment by a product, such as I'm wearing right now, or a denim or a t-shirt that you might be wearing as well. There might be still some hazardous chemicals in the product itself. And of course, they're tested, but sometimes they're still in there. Then these products get discarded, via your own bin or a recycling bin that's set out on the street or at the store. It can also end up in solid waste from the factory or gases that are being emitted via the factory pipes. And of course, via wastewater coming out of the factory. Now, okay, that's, several different pathways that it can come out of the factory, but what does it actually mean? What impact does it have, on not well treated water? What does happen to the environment? Now, of course, there's some things, there's a lot of different elements that we can talk about here. But one of those things is, for instance, oxygen depletion, where there's less oxygen in the water because of contamination. And therefore, in the end, the aquatic life or the marine life in the water is not able to survive, which of course also impacts, the environment and the communities in that area. But there can also be heavy metal contamination in the water, which ends up contaminating crops and also the food that is on our plates. So there's all these different impacts that can be, that improperly treated water can have on the environment. Now, to give you a short overview, because it's not only water that can have that specific impact, it can also be sludge coming out of a factory, which is more solid. It can, again, pollute the soil. It can pollute, therefore, also the crops and the harvest. It can pollute water and the aquatic organisms living in there. And, of course, as well, food that's being grown on the lands. So in the end, if you look at the whole chain, it does affect not only the first layers, but also the layers down the line, such as also the people that eat the food or the aquatic organisms that are swimming in the oceans. And we believe that there's enough reason, as we've shown you, that we need to, because of which we need to manage those chemicals. And because this is not an easy thing to do, we set up a holistic approach that will go step by step and tackle all the different steps within managing chemicals at a factory to see how we can improve that impact on the ground. The areas that we're currently supporting and guiding suppliers and brands with are the input area, where we see the chemicals coming into the factory, so they need to be purchased and they need to be stored and handled properly. Then we have the processes where the manufacturing is going on and the chemicals are being used during the manufacturing process and need to be handled well during those processings. And of course, we have the output where the chemicals come out of the factory and need to be treated properly to have less impact on the environment when they come out and are discharged. Now, one of the things that we've created on the input side is a ZDHC manufacturing restricted substance list. This list is a list of chemical substances that is banned from intentional use in facilities that process textiles, apparel, and footwear. So these substances on this list cannot be used during processing. And our idea is that if they're not used during the processing, then they will also not end up in the wastewater at the end, at the discharge site. And suppliers can use this list to compare it with their current inventory at the facility. Now, you can think that when it's a big facility, also the inventory will potentially be huge, right? So the ZDHC has decided to also set up a template for suppliers that they can use to inventorize their inventory that they have at the facility. And of course, this chemical inventory list template can be used to make proper purchase decisions on which chemicals need to be bought in and also need to be replaced potentially because they're hazardous, promote responsible chemical use, prevent pollution, increase traceability of the chemicals that you're buying, as well as transparency, help you with storage and handling, and also makes it more cost efficient in the end. The ZDHC CIL is used by a lot of factories currently worldwide, and it is a way for them in the end to also compare it to the ZDHC MRSL. And how that is being done, I will explain a little bit later. Now, next from the input side, also the process side is very important for us. And we've created a guidance where suppliers can use and read a framework and guidance material that is very practical to support them to implement a chemical management system at their facility. And of course, this is not an easy task, and it's something that takes a lot of time and effort from the facility. And because of that, we set up a framework that's actually quite straightforward with 9 steps that they need to do and work through to be able to set up the chemical management system in the facility. So firstly, they need to prepare and plan, work together with the factory management to set up a policy and a strategy, and as well start with baseline assessments, look at the regulations, chemicals that they have in storage, supply chains that we're working with, and potential safer alternatives that they can use at the facility. Additionally, as a next step, they can work on the implementation, how to make the factory healthier and safer by working on healthy and safety measurements such as labeling, protective equipment for the workers, as well as good storage and handling. Working with an MSCS, for example, a data sheet where you can read about the potential hazards of a chemical and how it needs to be used and handled when you use it in the facility, but also how to set up a chemical inventory. And the last step is a step where we can help them to look at the output management side, wastewater, sludge management, as well as process controls, and of course, continuous improvement. In this last part, they can also look at root causes where potential chemical pollution comes from at their facility and give them tools to improve that. What happens if the wastewater is not treated properly? Now, we've all seen a lot of different videos about green rivers, blue rivers, red rivers, based on the collections of different fashion brands. Also, the River Blue movie clearly shows, what happens if you don't treat wastewater properly. It cannot be used for further activities. Wastewater, when not treated properly, is contaminated. And of course, not usable, not drinkable, any of that. It will be harmful to the living health if not treated properly. And it will be able to cause severe water pollution, create severe health hazards, and of course also pollute the soil. Now, this causes a lot of challenges because it means that factories have to have everything in place to be able to treat the wastewater at the right way and also be able to manage that. Therefore, the ZDHC decided as a third tool to also create wastewater guidelines. And those guidelines are developed because there's so many different challenges out there for a supplier that in the end really confuses them. So there's multiple and differing national regulations, in all different countries that they have to conform to. There's all different brand standards that they have to conform to, coming from all the brands worldwide. Not all MRSL chemicals are generally covered. And as well, there's more desire to enhance environmental stewardship. So the pressure is on there. There's one very clear solution, and that's industry alignment. On one single wastewater quality standard. And it's basically the same as with the ZDHC MRSL, which is one ZDHC MRSL that can be used worldwide by different suppliers and different brands. This wastewater standard goes beyond regulatory compliance, but is used worldwide by all different brands and facilities, so that they measure the wastewater and test the wastewater in the same way via the same guidelines and the same operating procedures. And this ensures that wastewater discharge does not adversely affect the environment and surrounding communities anymore. The alignment in the end, both on the wastewater and the ZDHC MRSL, will also stop the confusion at the side of the supplier, because now they have one way of using these materials and also testing their chemical inventory list and their wastewater quality. Now, how does this all come together? And I really like this slide because it's very clear for all different target groups. So we focus a lot on the input, process, and output side. Now, of course, there's something to say about product design. I don't know if there's anybody currently at this event also that is very much into product design. But of course, there's already choices that you can make during the designing of a product that will impact the chemical management use later in the processing. So for example, if you choose a certain print or a certain dye, coloring, certain coatings on your denims, whatsoever, all these choices will in the end affect the chemicals being used at a facility. Now on the input side, we have the ZDHC MRSL, and that's all when the chemicals are being purchased from the formulators. And this is very much at the side of the material production. Then, of course, at the wet processing facilities, the chemicals needs to be managed in a proper way so that there's no potential hazards attached to it. And think about spills and leakages and protective equipment that's not used correctly by workers. This all can cause both environmental as also health hazards and harm. Then on the output side, of course, you might be known with product testing. That's all about looking if there's certain chemicals still left over in the products that are being produced and are coming off the production belt. But we also look at the wastewater side. So which chemicals went into the factory, which were used during processing, and how are they being cleaned up afterwards when coming out of the factory. Now, to work through all these processes, we have several tools that are in place to make sure that the supplier can do this in a step-by-step way, and that guides him through that journey. One of them is the Supplier to Zero program, which is a platform by now that can be used for a self-evaluation by a supplier. So the supplier can go through the system, see where he is in relation to chemical management, and also which topics he still needs to improve. And for that, we have use cases and different types of guidance materials on the platform that a supplier can use to improve himself and move up a level and reduce his impact on the environment. Then we also have the ZDHC Academy, which basically an educational center for suppliers and brands and other interested parties that are interested into chemical management, that teaches you how to set up chemical management systems and also how to work in wastewater management and wastewater treatment. Now, all of this together, so the tools and the guidance and the creating awareness of what's going on and how it impacts the environment, makes us to want to scale this implementation up and to make sure that we accelerate innovations and that we provide expertise to all these people on the ground, to make sure that we reduce the environmental impact and the impact it has on communities and the environment as a whole. Now, one of the things we did a couple of years ago was that we created the Detoxing the Fashion Industry Dummies book. And this book is the world's first guide for anyone, also fashion lovers, to learn and to understand how to get rid of the toxic chemicals that are used in the industry, with the goal to share knowledge, bust some myths on the topic, and shine a light on innovations in development, as well as the obstacles that are still there that we need to address. The booklet is freely downloadable, so I would advise you to do so because it's also a fun read, and you get to learn more and more about how you can detox the fashion industry and what the biggest challenges are. And we will share later the URL with you as well on where you can download the booklet, of course. Then what you can also do is look at training videos and webinars on the ZDHC Academy. If you're interested in chemical management, as a system, as well as how the ZDHC is working on the topic, or wastewater management for that matter, there's a lot of different webinars on the ZDHC Academy that are completely for free and that you can have a look at all times to broaden your knowledge on the topic. Now with that, I would like to come back to the fact that we are here at the Transformers ED not only to promote our ZDHC work. It's of course something that we want to share with you, but the main goal is that we want to show that the industry is actively working together on improving the impacts on the ground in relations to chemical management, as well as wastewater management, and that we need the suppliers, the brands, the whole industry, the whole value chain, as well as you and everybody out there to be more aware of the problem as a whole. And I think we can all recognize that we're all part of that value chain and we all have to chip in to create these improvements. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining also this Transformers ED, because with being there, you're creating more awareness within your own web network as well about this issue. And I would like to thank you very much for that. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel after this video. Thank you.